we study properties of material. This is a very important topic, properties of material. And what are the properties of material? First is appearance. Next is soluble or insoluble. And third property is object may float or sink into the water. And next property is transparency. And next is hardness. So what are the properties of materials? First is appearance. Next is hardness. And next is soluble or insoluble. And next property is object may float or sink into the water. And last property is transparency. Now I will discuss all properties of material in detail. Have you ever wondered why a tumbler is not made with a piece of cloth? So in the figure 4.2, a girl is here and he's taking a piece of paper, and I know that a tumbler is not made up of piece of cloth. So what is the material used for making a tumbler? So what is the material for making tumbler? So the material used for making tumbler is of plastic or glass. So recall our experiments with the piece of cloth in chapter 3. And also keep in mind that we generally use the tumblers to keep a liquid. So what is the purpose of tumbler? We store liquid in the tumbler. So tumbler is not made up of paper or piece of cloth. It is made up of either glass, either plastic, or any another metal. And why we use this type of material for making tumbler? Because it can hold water. Because the purpose of tumbler is to hold water. And metal, plastic, and glass can hold water, but paper cannot hold water. So the person, in the figure 4.2, he is making a tumbler with a piece of cloth. But the piece of cloth does not retain the water as shown in the figure 4.2, because because the piece of cloth is not used for making tumbler because it cannot retain the water. We see then that we choose the material to make an object depending on its property and the purpose for which the object is to be used. So firstly, we will discuss properties of the material when we make any object. So the property of the material is must. Firstly, we discuss the properties of material. Then we select a material for making any object. And what are the properties? First is appearance. So in the previous class, what we have discussed need to study properties of material. As we know, do you wonder why tumbler is not made of piece of cloth? This is a tumbler. It is why it is not made of piece of cloth. So in the need to study the properties of material. So as we know, we use tumbler to keep liquid. If we make tumbler with a piece of cloth, it cannot hold liquid in it. So if we use tumbler of cloth, so cloth cannot hold liquid in it. So we cannot make tumbler made up of piece of cloth. So as we know, which materials are used for making tumbler? We can make tumbler of material plastic, and we can make tumbler with a material metal, and it can be made from the glass. So 3 materials are used for making tumbler. And what are the materials? Plastic, metal, glass. Why we use these type of materials? Because it can hold water easily. It can hold water easily. So tumbler is made up of either plastic, either metal, or either glass. So why we use this type of material? Because it can hold water. Why tumbler is not made up of the piece of cloth? Because it cannot hold the water. So next question is, why are cooking utensils not made up of paper or plastic? The cooking utensils we use in everyday life, these are not made up of paper. And why these are not made up of paper or plastic? Because if we use if we use the paper for making the cooking utensil, then the paper burn as shown in the figure. If we use cooking utensil made up of paper, then the paper burn, then these destroy the all cooking utensils. And if we make cooking utensil made up of plastic, then this will also melt as shown in the figure. This will also melt as shown in the figure, because when he will catch fire, then all the material will melt. So what are the material used for cooking utensils? Metals. So what are the material used for making cooking utensils? Metals. We cannot use paper or plastic material for cooking utensils. So why we need to study the property of material? Why we study properties of material? Because properties of material are very important and to make a particular object. When we make any object, firstly, we should know the properties of material. Properties of material help to make a particular object. So firstly, some materials are used for making any material, and some material which is suitable for one product may not be suitable for another. For example, plastic. It is suitable for making buckets, jugs, and chairs and toys. So, but it is not used for making cooking utensils. So some material are suitable for one another one, and it cannot be suitable for another. So these are the properties of material. What are the properties of material? Firstly, lusters. What do you mean by lusters? The materials that have shiny surface are called lustrous materials. The material which have shining surface as shown in the figure, these have shining surface. So these are called lustrous material. And the material which does not shine, just like shown in the figure, and this rubber and this does not have shining surface. So these are non-lusters. The object which have shining surface are called lusters, and which does not have shining surface are called non-lusters. So we can also remove the metal with sandpaper as shown in the figure. Then the shining surface comes. If the shining surface does not come, so we can use sandpaper to remove dust on it, so that the lusters came out. So there are two types of material. First is lusters and next is no lusters. The materials which shine are called lusters, and the material which does not shine are called no lusters. So these are what is the property? Appearance. This is appearance. And next is, what is the property? Hardness. Some object, it can be easily compressed, and it can be easily scratched over it, and it can be changed its shape. So if it does not change its shape and it is hard, it does not easily compress, then it is hard. The material shown is in the figure, it cannot easily compress and it cannot change its shape, so it is hard. And next is This is a rubber. We can also cut it with a knife. This is a soft material. And this is a soft material because it can be cut with the help of knife. So it can be cut with the help of knife. So it is a very soft material. What is a soft material? The material which can be compressed easily and can be cut with the knife are called soft material. And next is ability to float. What do you mean by ability to float? So there are two objects which can float or not. So the objects shown in the figure, wood, plastic, rubber, they can float on the surface of water. So these objects, they can float on the water and they can stay on the surface of water. So these are called, they are floating materials. These are ability to float. And some material just like shown in the figure, metal, sand, stone. So these goes at the bottom of the water. So these cannot float, these can sink into the water. So there are two objects which can float and which can sink. So some materials can float and some materials cannot float. And what are the materials which can float? Wood, plastic, rubber. And what are the material which can sink into the water? Metal, sand, and stone. And next is these are the materials which can float. The material can float, and these materials do not float. So this is the ability to float, and this is also a property of material. And what is the another property of material? Solubility. For example, sugar solution, sour solution, lemon juice, lemon water, vinegar solution. So these are soluble in water. So some objects which are soluble in water are called soluble, and which are not dissolved into the water are called insoluble. So some objects which can dissolve into the water are called soluble, and some objects which cannot dissolve into the water are called insoluble. So these are soluble and insoluble substance. So what are the example of soluble substance? Sugar, salt, lemon, vinegar solution. These are soluble in water. But sand does not dissolve into the water. Chalk powder, it does not dissolve into the water. And coconut oil, and it also does not dissolve into the water. And kerosene oil, it does not dissolve into the water. So these are insoluble in water. So there are two types of substance, soluble and insoluble. The object which dissolve completely into the water are called soluble, and the substance which does not dissolve into the water are called insoluble. And next property is transparency. So there are three types of objects. First is transparent. What do you mean by transparent? These materials allow us to look through them. For example, glass, water. These are called transparent material in which we can see easily. The material in which we can see easily are called transparent materials. So these are transparent material. And these are the material wood, mud, sand. These does not allow to look through them. So these are opaque substance. So these are opaque substance. And what is the property? Transparency. So in the transparency, first is transparent object. Next is opaque object. And next is translucent object. And what do you mean by transparent object? The material in which we can see easily. And what are the example of transparent material? Glass and water. And the object in which we cannot see. And what are the example of opaque object? Wood, sand, mud. And next is, what do you mean by translucent material? the object in which we can see partially. And these objects are called translucent materials. So these objects are called translucent materials. So these are properties of material, which we'll discuss in detail. So first property is appearance. But material usually look different from each other, would look very different from iron. So every material is different from another material. As we know, iron is different from copper and copper is different from aluminium. So every material is different from another material. So this is the property appearance. So what is the activity? Activity 3, we have collecting the different material, just like paper, just like cardboard, just like wood, just like a copper wire, aluminium sheet, and chalk. Do any of these appear shiny? When we check that these substance, paper, cardboard, wood, so what are these objects, shining or not shining? So if the shining does not occur, we can cut the piece into small pieces. As shown in the figure, we are cutting the object into two pieces and look at the freshly cut surface. What do you notice? Does the freshly cut surface of some materials appear shining? So some object appear shining, and include this object in the group of shining materials. Do you notice such a shining or lusters in the other material? So as we know, if shining surface does not occur, we can cut the material into two halves as shown in the figure. After cutting these pieces, if cutting materials, if cutting piece contains lusters, then they are called lusters object. If the cutting surface contains shining surface, then it have lusters. Otherwise, it does not have lusters. And what is the another method to check lusters? If we don't want to cut the substance, you can rub the material with sandpaper. If we rub the material with sandpaper, if it shows lusters, then it is if it shows shining surface, then it is lustrous object. And if it does not show the shining surface, then it is called non-lustrous object. So there are two types of object, lustrous object and non-lustrous object. The material which have shining surface are called lustrous object, and the material which does not shine are called non-lustrous object. And how can we check lusters in any object? We can cut piece into the two different, we can cut the piece into two halves, and if the cutting materials contain shining surface, then this is a if cutting surface shining surface, then it has lusters, and if cutting surface does not contain shining surface, then it is a no lusters. And what is the another method? If we remove the surface with the sandpaper, if you rub the surface of material with sandpaper, and if it does show the shining surface, then it is a lusters. Otherwise, it does not have lusters. So the materials that have lusters are called lusters object, and the materials which are no lusters are called, which does not shine, are called non-lusters. So what are the example of lusters? Metals, iron, just like iron, copper, aluminium, these are lusters. And what are the example of non-lusters? Just like rubber, these are non-lusters object. So all metals have lusters, but if they come into the contact of air and moisture, they become dull. Means it become non-lusters if they came into the contact of air and water. जब metals air और water की contact में आती हैं, तो उसके ऊपर रस्ट लग जाता है, जंग लग जाता है, उसकी वजह से वो लस्टर्स की बजाय नॉन लस्टर्स बन जाती हैं. पहले वो लस्टर्स थी जब वो एयर और वाटर की कॉन्टेक्ट में आती हैं तो उसके ऊपर रस्ट लग जाता है, जंग लग जाता है, so they become non-lusters. And what is another property? Hardness. What do you mean by hardness? So there are two types of object. First is soft and next is hard. What do you mean by soft substance? The material which can be compressed easily are called soft substance, and the material which cannot be compressed easily are called hard substance. And what are the example of soft substance? Cotton. It is a very soft. And iron, it cannot be compressed and it is a hard material. So next property is soluble or insoluble. What are the properties of material? First is appearance, means lusters or non-lusters. And what is the next property of the material? Hardness. Hardness means soft or hard. And what is the third property of the material? Soluble or insoluble. So in this activity, we are taking the 5 glasses and we are adding in the first glass sugar, and in the second glass salt, and in the third glass chalk powder, and in the fourth glass sand, and the fifth glass sawdust. So we are taking the 5 beakers and we are filling the different substance: salt, sugar, salt, sand, chalk powder, and sawdust. And we can dissolve it with the help of spoon. And if in the 4-5 substance, some objects dissolve into the water and some objects will does not dissolve into the water. For example, salt, it disappear completely into the water. And sugar, it also disappear completely in the sugar. But sand, it does not disappear completely into the water. And chalk powder, it does not appear in it does not dissolve into the water, and sawdust, it also does not dissolve into the water. So the material which dissolve into the water are called soluble substance, and the material which does not dissolve into the water are called insoluble substance. So salt, sugar, these are soluble, and sand, chalk powder, and sawdust are insoluble. Salt, sugar, and sand are soluble, and chalk powder and sawdust are insoluble. So these are example of soluble and insoluble. And what is the next property? What is the next property? Object may float or sink into the water. So, and what is the activity 5? So in the activity 5, we are taking different liquids. And what are liquids? Vinegar, lemon juice, mustard oil, coconut oil, and kerosene. And we are mixing liquid into liquid. And what is another liquid? Water. We are mixing vinegar, lemon juice, mustard oil, and kerosene oil into the water. Some liquid dissolve into the water and some liquid does not dissolve into the water. And the liquid which dissolve into the water and which mix into the water are called miscible liquids. The liquids which dissolve into the water or mix into the water are called miscible liquids, and the liquid which does not dissolve into the liquid are called immiscible liquid. For example, vinegar, it mix well into the water, so it is a miscible liquid. For example, lemon juice, it will also mix into the water, so it is a miscible liquid. For example, mustard oil, coconut oil, and kerosene, it does not dissolve into the water. It forms a separate layer on the water. As shown in the figure B, the oil forms a separate layer on the surface of water. So it is a immiscible liquid. So some liquids are miscible liquids and some liquids are miscible liquids and some liquids are immiscible liquids. So these are the miscible liquids and immiscible liquids. As we know, we notice that some liquids can completely mix it with the water. So these are called miscible liquids, and some liquids cannot dissolve into the water are called immiscible liquid. So as we know, solid also dissolve into the water and liquid also dissolve into the water. And what about gases? Paheli is asking one question. As we know, solid also dissolve into the water and liquid also dissolve into the water. Is gases also dissolve into the water? Answer is some gases are soluble in water and some gases are not soluble in water. As we know, for example, in the cold drink we use gases are dissolved into the water. So some gases are soluble in water and some gases are not soluble in water. For example, oxygen gas dissolve. What is the formula of water? H2O. H2O means oxygen gas is dissolved into the water. Means oxygen gas is dissolved into the water. And what is the formula of water? H2O. H2O means O means oxygen. Oxygen is dissolved into the water. And when aquatic plants and animals live in the water, and then they can survive because in the water oxygen is present. So what is the question? How animals and plants survive into the water? Because in the क्योंकि water के अंदर क्या होता है? ऑक्सीजन प्रेजेंट होती है, तो जो एक्वेटिक एनिमल्स होते हैं जस्ट लाइक फिश, वो पानी में कैसे सरवाइव कर पाते हैं? क्योंकि वो पानी में जो ऑक्सीजन प्रेजेंट होती है वहां से ऑक्सीजन लेते हैं और वो सांस लेते हैं वहां से, सो दैट दे कैन लिव इनटू द वाटर. So they use oxygen dissolved into the water for their survival. So some gases also dissolve into the water, but some gases does not dissolve into the water. So what are the properties of material? Appearance and soluble or insoluble and hard surface and smooth surface, soft materials. And next property is object may float or sink into the water. The object which are lighter will float on the water and the object which are heavier will sink into the water. कुछ जो ऑब्जेक्ट्स हैं वो पानी में फ्लोट करते हैं, तैरते हैं, और कुछ डूब जाते हैं. जो हल्के होते हैं that they can float into the water and the which are heavier they can sink into the water. So next is, so this is the example shown in the figure. Some objects float into the water and some objects will sink into the water. So there are two different objects. Some object which can float into the water and which can sink into the water. So the object which are lighter, they can float into the water, and the object which are harder, they can sink into the water. And what is the next property? Transparency. So the Bujo is showing the three papers. So what are the three papers? In the first figure, all some objects can be seen. No objects can be seen in the first figure. So this is the opaque objects. And in the second paper, it is a oily paper, and some objects can be seen and some objects cannot be seen. So this is a translucent paper. And in the third figure, all objects can be seen through this paper. So it is a translucent material. So the material in which we can see all the things are called transparent material. So third figure is transparent. And in the first, no objects can be seen. So this is the opaque objects. And in the second figure, this is the oily paper. Some objects can be seen and some objects cannot be seen. So this is the what is the material? Translucent material. So there are three types of material: transparent, translucent, and opaque object. So what is the next question? Why the shopkeeper use the transparent material to store biscuits, sweets, and other eatables in the transparent container of glass or plastic? जो शॉपकीपर होते हैं वो ये ग्लास का मटेरियल क्यों यूज करते हैं ये अपनी जो सामान स्टोर करने में? जो बिस्किट्स हैं, स्वीट्स हैं, वो ट्रांसपेरेंट कंटेनर में ही क्यों रखे होते हैं? क्योंकि जो भी इसको खरीदने वाला है उसको वो अच्छे से देख सके, so that buyers can easily see these items. Why they store into the transparent container? So that buyers can see easily these items. On the other hand, there are some materials through which we are not able to see. These are called opaque objects. So these are called opaque objects. And there are three types of object: transparent, translucent, or the opaque object. So any query regarding this topic? So any query regarding this topic, raise your hands. Any query regarding this topic, please raise your hands. Raise your hands if you have any query regarding this topic. Please raise your hands. Yes, Dev. Dev, read, yes. What is the question? Raise your hands. Speak, please. Dev and read. Akash sir, please unmute the students. Akash sir, please unmute the students.